is we're gonna make a comfrey salve. I have enough for at least every group to take some. We might have to make it in 2 batches, but I'm gonna start. I've got some comfrey that I have been. Where's my pot? Is this what you're looking for? That is my pot, yes. Not to be confused with you. But yeah, this is my pot. All right. So I have dedicated pots that I use for making my salves because primarily I use beeswax. This is some beeswax pastilles, little beeswax pebbles that I use for a lot of the salves. But this is a comfrey infused oil that I've been steeping in preparation for this class for about 6 to 8 weeks. But this isn't enough to make like 15 batches. So
wow.
So it's not enough. So we're gonna make a quick infused oil here today in my Instant Pot. So as I'm talking about comfrey, I'm gonna be putting together a little potion for us. So the comfrey leaves, ideally to use comfrey, if you're not making a quick infusion, then what you're gonna wanna do is pick the leaves the night before, and you're gonna want to let them desiccate a little because they're very, I'll pass some around, they're very juicy leaves. They're a little fuzzy, but they have a high water content. So if you're going to be doing a long infusion, like I've been doing here, I dry out the leaves because you don't want to impart moisture into your infused oil. But for today, I'm doing a quick infusion, so I'm just gonna jam some of these comfrey leaves into my jar, and I'm gonna add a good amount of olive oil. Carrier oils that I like to use are either olive oil, which is usually going to be your cheapest and most readily available oil. You can use sunflower oil. You can use almond oil, which tends to be a little bit more expensive, but that has its own nice healing qualities to it. You can use grapeseed oil. You can use, what's the 4th oil that I like to use? Jojoba oil. But again, jojoba oil, you're going to use that for smaller batches because it is a little bit more expensive. So I'm just going to start a little double boiler here in my Instant Pot. Sorry that I'm all over the place, but I've got to get over there and get some water.
Yep, I got it.
I'll get
Thanks. How much?
Just like maybe an inch
A
to
third.
2 inches in the bottom.
Where the line you can kind of see it.
Thank you. Did everybody get to touch the comfrey leaves? Does anybody have any information that you want to wrap up? You're welcome to do.
My arm. Here you go. I would try it. You just like
Yep,
wrap
just
it around.
just wrap it. Yeah, just wrap it and then pull your sleeve over it. That'll work.
Okay.
If you have like gauze or tape, you could tape it on there. So, comfrey, in your little booklet, we have a lot to get to. In your booklet, it talks about some of the healing properties of your comfrey. So, we can talk about those a little bit. Let me get this started. I'm just going to put my little Instant Pot on saute, my little mobile station here. We're also going to use that to melt the beeswax. I'm going to grab my laptop since I don't have extra. So I was talking about the podcast and why we started the podcast, but this is why I started making my own medicine. I think for many of us during COVID, we all realized that we couldn't rely on the supply chains, on the commercial mainstream businesses to always be there for us. And I think for the first time in our lives, a lot of us realized, whoa, there's not some kind of magical grocery store shelf that just produces everything that we need. So when I started realizing in a grid down, shit hits the fan situation, nobody's coming to save you, that's when I started deciding that I needed to learn to do some things for myself. When my kids were very young, my kids are all grown, they're all in their late 20s and 30s now, 6 kids, 11 grandkids. it's a very full life. But we had goats and chickens and cows when they were growing up. But once everybody graduated from high school, all the farm animals also graduated. And so we had several years where we weren't raising anything. I wasn't growing a garden. I wasn't gathering eggs or milking anything. And then when COVID hit, it was like, oh my gosh, we need to start bringing these things back into our household. So now we have sheep and goats and chickens and rabbits. And I've got a full garden and working on permaculture gardening so that, you know, I can sustain myself and other people. The other thing about why I think natural medicine is so important is because when you think about any kind of medication that you take, most of the medications that we take are plant-based, from aspirin to, you know, lisinopril. Scientists have looked at natural traditional healers and the places where things grow, where people aren't impacted by disease. And so they isolate different plants and different healing properties of plants. And then they study those plants to figure out what is this chemical compound that causes your blood pressure to lower, that causes you not to reject organs, whatever the case may be. And then they isolate those chemicals and then start producing them synthetically. The important thing about plant medicine, like from the actual plant, is that when you're isolating those compounds out of a plant and you're synthetically producing them, you are looking at that chemical in isolation, whether it's a flavonoid or whatever the case may be. And the body and microbes become resistant to those things. We've all heard about antibiotic resistant diseases or bacteria. MRSA, for example. It resists almost every kind of antibiotic that we know about. So when you're using a whole plant-based medicine that you've created from the plant itself, those microbes are much less likely to learn how to become resistant to it because it's all of those chemicals in that plant acting in synergy. So it's oftentimes a better medicine than what you're going to be able to get made commercially. And then there's also not a profit being made by someone. You can't charge like $5,000 a dose for, you know, some weed that grows out in your garden. And while we're talking about that, most of the things that we're talking about today are weeds. They're considered invasives. They grow by the side of the road. They grow in blighted areas. If you tear down a house, these are plants that are going to grow right up in the foundation where that house used to be. And we don't recognize them as having any value because we're told that they're weeds when they actually do have a lot of value. Let me log into my computer real quick. And then we'll talk about comfrey. One of the other things that I did want to mention, and Gail's recording and I'm all over the room.
Oh, you're fine.
Oh, that's so funny. So when we're talking about the different kinds of medicines that we make, generally we're talking about 8 or 9 different methods of creating plant medicine. The one that comes readily to mind is teas. You know, we can take leaves, we can steep them in boiling water, and we can make, I'm just monitoring to make sure I don't overboil my oil over there. We can make teas, we can make tinctures. Tinctures is essentially the same as steeping a tea, except you're steeping it in 100 proof alcohol. So a vodka, a brandy. For some things you might steep it in rum. So you're steeping the plant-based material in an alcohol. We make infused oils, which is what I'm doing today, steeping it for long periods of time in the oil carrier, or quickly infusing them, adding heat in order to infuse it into the oil. We make compresses, which is essentially boiling the tea, putting a towel or a cloth in it, and then applying it to the affected area. We make poultices, which a poultice is generally when you macerate or chop up, grind up the plant material, and then apply it directly to the wound. That would be considered a poultice. And then
Is that
from
what the comfrey was that you gave me?
the comfrey is a salve. So
Oh, okay.
so basically, like you could use the comfrey as a poultice by chopping up or juicing the leaves and then applying it to your wound and then covering the wound. We're going to talk about plantain, not plantain the glorified banana, but plantain the weed. And that's a really good one to have in your knowledge bank to use as a poultice. So we'll talk about that, using it as a poultice. But the poultice, you're not adding anything to it. The comfrey salve, which is what you have, and then what we're going to make today, that is a salve. And basically what a salve is an infused oil added to something to make it into a more hardened product, so that it preserves it over a period of time so that you can keep it for a longer period of time. So today we're going to take infused comfrey oil and we're going to add it to beeswax in order to make a nice salve. So then you have salves, which is kind of like a hardened application of a topical medicine. You have ointments, which is similar to a salve, except it's a little looser, a little juicier. And then again, the oil. I think that's it. Oh, and the other way that you can sometimes use plant-based medicine is to inhale it. But we're not really going to talk about that today. So we're going to primarily talk about teas, tinctures, and I still haven't signed in. Teas, tinctures, and infused oil, aka making those things into salve.